Welcome to One Woman. I'm your host, Sharla Brown, and on today's show we have a very special guest, Nahla Summers. And I always say One Woman is sharing the lives and the stories of women here in our community, but also from around the world. And Nahla is my first guest who's from the UK, all the way here in Thunder Bay for our Fearless event this weekend. So I just really want to say thank you, Nahla, for coming.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about tomorrow. I'm really excited about your event.
Yes, so we had the opportunity, because you got here a little bit early, to be able to really talk about and share with our viewers your story. So let's talk about what it was like growing up in the UK.
I was very lucky in the UK. England is a wonderful place to grow up. And I was very fortunate with my family, and we lived in the same house and, in the countryside. And so, yeah, I was very lucky in many aspects.
Right. And growing up, as you got older, did you, continue your studies in the UK? I know you've done lots of traveling. When did the, travel bug hit you and all that good stuff?
So I was not particularly very good in school and education. My education has mainly been around the people that I've met on my travels, and that's where I've grown and developed, and through my own education. I did go through university, but I think as you get older, you discover the things that you really enjoy.
Yes.
And in your youth, you're not quite sure about what that looks like.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about career life. So, where has your career path kind of taken you from, when you first started in the working world, and how that evolved, and, what you decided to be as you grew up?
Yeah, I fell very much into my career. I did facilities management for 15 years, which is property maintenance. I'm not quite sure what you call it here. And I did that for 15 years. I fell into it because I started a job as a cleaning manager because it paid me money and gave me a car when I was at university, and I enjoyed that aspect of being with people, managing people, and then I changed my career into personal coaching, which is much more just focused on people and less about buildings. So.
Right. And I think that's what a lot of us fall victim to, is that you choose something that pays the bills, and what you're supposed to do. You hit an age where your parents say, you got to get a real job, and so you start exploring and you get a job, but it's maybe not necessarily something that you're super content with.
Yeah.
So you definitely have made some changes and things as you traveled, and that's kind of you met your partner through work as well.
Yeah, I met my partner when I was working in facilities management. We were best friends really for a long time, which is what happens when you're working with somebody. And then eventually that turned into a relationship.
Right,
yeah,
right.
We had a great time.
Which often happens, you work with somebody and you really get to know that person because you see them, just as a coworker, right? You see people's the good, the bad, the ugly, all that stuff.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Whether you're compatible and things or not. So tell me about that in terms of, meeting your partner in life, and how that kind of happened and evolved and turned into that relationship.
Yeah, we were, for me, I was very lucky to have met Paul, who was my partner, and the life that we led together. It was meeting my soulmate, and it started from a friendship. It was the making of me in many ways. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2012, in March 2012. And when that happened, it was life-changing. I had been very much on this roundabout of the corporate life, and it was not the right place for me to be on. I was holding on to it for dear life to pay the bills and live the life that I was expected to live, but it was not the life that was right for me. And after losing Paul, it was the momentum that I needed to change the way that I was living and do things that I was more passionate about. And I'm more passionate about people and their well-being and emotional intelligence and helping people to grow than I probably am about buildings.
Right.
Not that I didn't enjoy my corporate life, but it was certainly gave me the momentum to change my life.
Right, and sometimes it's the fact that you would hate that a tragedy has to happen in your life to make those changes.
Absolutely.
But sometimes those are the things that just that's what life has dealt you,
Yeah,
and having to go through those things, and that it gets you to where you are today.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think as a lot of women, you know, that's your biggest fear in life, is losing somebody who you love. So whether
Yeah.
you're losing a spouse or a partner or a child or a parent or somebody who's close to you, and kind of what that looked like for you to lose somebody who is so significant in your life.
Yeah, I had not lost anybody so suddenly and so significantly. It was the moment that he was there, and then he was no longer there. And life just so dramatically changed. You know, we were living the idyllic life. He would say to me, you know, I feel that something will happen because everything is so perfect. And I dropped him off for a charity cycle ride, and then he wasn't there anymore. He called me, he said he didn't feel very well, and when I called back, effectively he had gone. When I walked back into our home that I had just left that morning, and just with his belongings and his slippers sat by the door where he left them, it was that realization that all the things that had been familiar were never going to be familiar again. And so there was really, obviously it took a long time for me to get there over the following few years, but there was no fear anymore of jumping off that roundabout. There was no fear of saying, actually, you know, now I don't have anything to lose, because the alternative is much worse. So yeah, it was life-changing for me.
Absolutely. And what did things look like? Like, you know, you go through that day where you've lost that person, and, you know, there's got to be a huge, you know, progression of things that got you to, you know, where you are now. You know, what do those first few days look like? And, you know, the fact that, you know, you've written a book and a story to be able to, you know, you've relived that. And so what do those look like, and how do you get through to there? Because I think a lot of women can stay stuck there for a really long time.
Yeah. For me, there was an almost a craziness to the way that I was, and I allowed that to happen. I would repeatedly ask questions about, and asking, where have you gone? It was probably the thing that I repeated over and over again to people that came into the house, and I needed to be with him. Those days I would sit and write to him. Every day I wrote to him as though he still existed. I talked to him as though he was still existed. I felt as though he was still around me. And I was okay with that. I was okay with not being okay. And that was one of the most powerful things. Previous to Paul dying, I had not been okay with not being okay. I was now in a situation where I was saying, you know, I'm going to be sad now, and that's okay. I didn't try to change what was happening in any way.
Right.
So.
And that's your time to grieve. And I think that being okay with not being okay is something that a lot of women struggle with, because they need to be that tough one. They need to be there for everybody else. So the fact that you allowed yourself to not be okay was really important and life-changing for you.
Yes. Yeah, it really was.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to be right back with Nahla and talk more about her story. Welcome back to One Woman. I'm your host, Sharla Brown, and on today's show, we've been talking with Nahla Summers, who's joined us all the way from the UK, sharing with us her incredible story and, you know, the real and raw parts of us, you know, as women. It's not always, you know, sparkles and sunshine, and, you know, there's tragedies that happen in a woman's life. And for you, you know, losing your partner, Paul, you know, was probably one of the most tragic things that you've went through. And we talked about, you know, not being okay with not being okay. But there's a point where you kind of have that pivotal moment where, you know, you start working your way through things.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that as to kind of how you start making those steps forward.
Yeah. It was interesting because I was very isolated in myself. My parents are wonderful, but I just couldn't have people around me. So my mother used to sit and listen to me cry on the phone. I was very insular within the house. I couldn't have people move things. I mean, the capacity of my mother's love to be able to sit there and listen to that was quite astounding. I see that now. At the time, it was just what I needed to do. We lived in a lovely cottage on the beach. It was his dream, really, to live there. It was my dream to live on the beach. It was his dream to live in a cottage. So we had a cottage on the beach that he found for us. We used to spend a lot of time on the beach, even in cold England. We used to spend a lot of time there. And the sun was setting. This one day, I would say it was probably within the first month since losing him, I walked out onto the beach and there was a horse being trained and it was doing backward figures of eights, really wonderful. And the sun was setting, and you know, in any normal circumstances there would be this idyllic situation, but I was still so consumed by sadness. Mm-hmm. And all my thoughts were, I don't know how this ends, I don't know how I get over this, where have you gone? You know, it was consistently going over in my mind. And there was a man, now it was an empty beach, and there was a man walking along with his dog, and he stopped and started talking to me and asked me if the horse was mine, and asked me, you know, about what, you know, where I was from, and started talking about horses and how they would help people through troubled times and the healing powers that horses had. And it was this really lovely story of kind of hope and love, and you know, just, he must have seen in me my sadness as I sat there, because he alleviated me for that 15 minutes. And as I finished that conversation with him, I thought, I haven't been consumed by that sadness. And it gave me some hope and a way to start to move forwards in many ways. Although I didn't quite, you know, the very next day start to change my life around, but it was something that stuck with me about his kindness. It was the way that it was something so small, and I truly do believe that he recognised that I needed somebody. I needed somebody to just talk to me. And from there, really, kindness was something that, you know, became so important throughout my healing process of losing Paul. And every time somebody was kind, it felt like the biggest thing to me. And it was so powerful in the change in life that I needed to make in myself.
Right,
So,
and healing.
Yeah.
You know, healing, you know, that's, you had a broken heart, you were grieving, and to have that love and kindness shown to you, you know, helped you start to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, one part of kind of where things have brought you today, and, you know, what you're doing now. Another big part was you and Paul had a bucket list together.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about this bucket list and being able to look at that when that person's not there anymore.
Yeah. I can remember when we first did it, it was me that said, we need to do this list. Well, we won't be able to afford to do it. We won't be able to do it. We won't, you know, and I said, well, let's just do it anyway. Let's just write it and let's have it there. And we did a couple of things off the list. And it was always stuck on the pin board, and it gave us some motivations, and it was always things to aim for, and it became discussion points, and it was hope. You know, it was hope when we didn't necessarily need it at the time. But yeah, when it was sat on the pin board, I can remember the feeling of looking at it, and it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see all the things that we weren't going to be able to do together. Eventually, though, what I what I always talk about is I held on to hope. And while I didn't necessarily have the ability to be able to make the changes in my life at that moment, I had hope. And eventually that manifested itself into the seeing and the doing and all the things that I needed to start saying yes to life again. And that bucket list that sat on the pinboard suddenly started to become the instrument of, okay, well, maybe I can do one of these things. Well, maybe I should do one of these things, and it started on a trip to Australia and all sorts of, other amazing things that I went and did, India, and rode the train, and yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of those amazing things, and that you decided that, you were going to do these, but you were still going to include Paul and do these things in his honor.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that first trip when you decide that, hey, I'm finally going to circle when I'm going to do something. What did that look like?
Well, yeah, it was very emotional. It was hugely emotional. The trip to Australia, I felt that I was connected with him, but it was also part of that grieving. So I think I cried all the way home from Australia, the sadness of not having him with me. But there was also an acceptance that I believed that I could carry him with me in my heart and that he could come and do these things with me. And eventually now I've obviously become much stronger and, 6 years on, and I do these things slightly differently now. But though the first thing was really saddening in many ways as parts of it, but also empowering in terms of I can do this, and it starts the momentum. You face the fear once and you can just keep going. So yeah, it was a mix of emotions, that first thing off the list.
Right, absolutely. And one of those first things, I can't remember if it was when you climbed Kilimanjaro that you did it as a fundraiser, but then you soon realized that money wasn't the best driving factor. So let's tell our viewers that story, because it's a good one.
So yeah, he passed away in the March, and in the November I climbed Kilimanjaro for a charity that's based in the UK. That was very dear to his heart, actually. And when I called up, the money had come in from various different places, and it had been what I thought was grouped together. And when I called the charity, I said, I really want to put something in his memory. Just something to say, well, this is set out in his memory. I want good things to be set up. And unfortunately, they said, actually, we haven't tracked the money and we don't know where that money is now. It's kind of in the big pot of things. And I was saddened that was what his memory was going to come down to. I didn't want that for him. And I realized that acts of kindness were something that I wanted his memory to be about. We always had a bit of a joke about good karma. And he would call me up. I can remember various different things that he did, and he'd call me up very excited. Oh, I got good karma today. I did something great. Because I used to always talk about it. I believe that if you do good things come back to you. I'm a big believer in that. So, and he started to believe that too. And so yeah, and with everything started to steer me towards kindness. So instead I started a course called Sunshine People, and Sunshine People is where I still do these crazy challenges. Most of my friends would call them crazy because I'm normally not very experienced in whatever I choose to do, but I do them anyway. And instead of asking people to donate money, I ask them to do an act of kindness for a stranger and then write and tell me about it on the website.
Awesome.
On the Sunshine People website.
Well, we're going to delve into that in the next segment, but we're going to take a quick break and you're going to learn all about Sunshine People in the next segment. Welcome back to One Woman. I'm your host, Sharla Brown, and if you're just tuning in, we've been speaking with Nahla Summers today all about her incredible life. And before the segment, we were talking about your organization, which you started, which is called Sunshine People, which most organization runs on dollars and cents and all that stuff. And your organization has nothing to do with money and has everything to do with acts of kindness. So let's talk about a little bit about Sunshine People and what the whole passion and purpose is behind that.
Yeah, my biggest thing around it is that I believe it comes down to human connection. When I started to equate Paul's life down to money and how much money I had raised in his memory, it didn't sit right with me. It didn't feel right. Acts of kindness, something that we joked about and talked about, and the effect that kindness has. And it doesn't mean that people won't give money or do something around money, but what I'm trying to encourage is that we have more human connection. We live in a changing world where social media is big and that will never change, but it's so important, I believe, to keep that human connection and to encourage our younger generation to see acts of kindness, to read about them, to be inspired by, constant good human connection. So, yeah.
And the impact that can make, in terms of we've talked about that a few times in terms of that ripple effect, is that it's endless. A check's going to come to the end of its life in terms of how far it will go. But acts of kindness is infinite as to the reach that it can have.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, since you've started the organization and you're still doing these unbelievable trips and activities that you're doing right now, you're heading from Thunder Bay to cycle across the U.S. How many kilometers?
Yeah, so I think it's 5,000 and something kilometers. It's 3,055 miles.
Wow.
So from San Diego to St. Augustine, 3,055 miles.
Wow. And how do you choose these things that you're going to do? You just decide that?
Yeah, they just come in various different ways. Somebody mentioned something, previous year it was quite a small event, but it was just me and one of my foster children that I had at the time. She was only 10. She cycled 25 miles in that day. It was absolutely astonishing. And she just, as the acts of kindness came in, it just inspired her to realize that however bad things are, that good things can happen from that. And the impact and the ripples are endless to those things. So,
absolutely. And the amount of kindness that you've experienced because of starting this, people who've said, whether it's somewhere to stay or someone to help you make it happen, and just the whole idea that the more kind you are, the more kindness that comes back to you.
Yeah, and it's been absolutely astonishing. It seems to me that I just seem to have more and more kindness come into my life because of the way that I'm changing my life. And I'm a big believer in what you attract is what you believe.
Yes, absolutely. And so the whole principle of the website is for people to do acts of kindness, but then to share their stories. So I would imagine one of the most exciting things for you is to hear this feedback. So maybe you can share one of the stories that, that really touched you, that said, hey, I'm so glad I started this because, this is the difference it makes.
I mean, some of the small ones I absolutely love because I know that they have such a huge impact, the smiles at people, or the helping somebody. But there's a friend of mine, I can remember the first year that I set it up, and he said, I promise I'm going to do an act of kindness. I just need that. I need something to happen. I'm waiting for it to happen, but I will sponsor you. It's in my mind. And I said, okay, that's brilliant. And then maybe 2 weeks went by and I suddenly get this post on Facebook with this long story. And the story goes that it was his son's birthday and he'd taken him to an event that had actually been cancelled. But they were going for food, and it was his son's birthday. And they walked back through the city that they live, and there was a man who was homeless on the side of the pavement, and he didn't have very much money, but he gave a small amount, and his son, because behaviour breeds behaviour, also said, can I give the small amount of money I have? So they gave him some money and they walked away. What then happened was his son started to ask him about, well, why is he homeless? And he wanted to know more and more about homelessness. His dad responded, well, but everyone's circumstances are very different. His dad, remembering that he had promised to sponsor me, said, okay, well, what about asking if the man wants to come for food with us? Would you like to do that? Because it's your birthday, you can ask him. Yeah, let's do that. And his son was hugely enthusiastic about it. They went back, asked the man if they wanted to come and eat with them. And they took him for food, and the man told them that he was ex-forces, that he, through a set of circumstances, had become homeless. His name was John. And talked about some of the charities that were supporting him, small charities that were not money orientated. And what that started was the little boy learnt about homelessness and the fine line between what was a privileged life and what can be homelessness. And it was just this heartwarming story where actually those people who were giving the kindness learnt more and took more away than the man who was fed that day. So it was
powerful.
It was a powerful story.
Powerful stuff. Well, we're getting close to the end of the show, but I know you've written a beautiful book just about your whole experience and going through grief and losing someone, and a big part of that for anybody is feeling alone, and I think that's what the beautiful part of this book is that it's something that helps people that you have a real life story of somebody who's been through it. So let's touch a little bit out on the book and where people can find it.
Yeah, so it's called 44 Rays of Sunshine. I almost don't want to spoil the reason why it's called that, because it comes at the end, for those that are interested in reading it. And it's a very raw and real account of human emotion and how we get through it. And it's a lot of people have said it helps them in, even if they haven't gone through grief, it helps them with the fear of going through grief, and has been quite inspiring for people that have read it. So 44 Rays of Sunshine.
Wonderful. So, and if somebody's looking to connect with you, Sunshine People have you have a website for all this, and they can share their acts of kindness?
Yeah, I would love that. The aim is to raise 3,055 acts of kindness this year for how many miles I'm cycling, so please do. And it's sunshinepeople.org.uk.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you, Nahla, for being on the show today, for coming all this way, for sharing your story with us today. You'll change a lot of lives through what you're doing. So thankful for the gifts that you are sharing in this world. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Be sure to watch next week with more on One Woman.